A gente agora vai conversar com o John Newbigin. Ele é pesquisador no World Conference on Creative Economy e fundador da Creative England, uma parceria público-privada que investe em conteúdo criativo e empresas de tecnologia global. O John vai destacar o papel da propriedade intelectual e de políticas públicas para o fortalecimento da economia criativa. Seja bem-vindo. Welcome.
Boa tarde. It's been 2 fascinating days of talking about subjects which in English we'd call slippery. They slide between your fingers. Creativity, culture, soft power, all these things are very tricky terms which it's difficult to pin down. Nevertheless, everybody in the world is talking about them. But I have 2 regrets. One is not my regrets, maybe your regrets. I'm going to speak in English. The second thing is, for the last session of the day, we should be having something very entertaining, but this is not going to be entertaining. Don't blame me, blame Firjan. They asked me to talk about creativity as an asset and intellectual property, 2 very serious subjects. So I will try and make them a little bit more interesting than perhaps they sound. So, doesn't seem to like my... Okay. So everybody's getting interested in creativity. And 2 weeks ago, at the World Cities Culture Forum in Amsterdam, which is an annual summit of 50 cities from all around the world who think that creativity and culture is the thread that keeps them prosperous, keeps their citizens in harmony and feeling fulfilled. So it's a really important organization. Rio de Janeiro is a member, Sao Paulo is a member, Brasilia is a member. But of course, World Cities Culture Forum is not the only organization dealing with culture and creativity around the world at a city level. And I want to talk a little bit about cities. There's also a UNESCO Creative Cities group, which has got 300 members. Rio de Janeiro is also a member of that. There's World Creativity Day, Brazilian invention. 128 cities celebrate World Creativity Day. In Indonesia, there are 200 creative cities in a creative city network. So everybody is getting more and more interested in what's happening in this creative space. And maybe one of the reasons for that is what happened during the pandemic. Because I think in the pandemic, we all realized that when the world of finance and the economy comes to a halt, it's culture that holds us together. And when everything stopped in the world, people began to tell jokes online, musicians played in the street to entertain their neighbors, thousands of people around the world did the Jerusalem Dance Challenge and videoed themselves doing it. So we realized that social capital is the fundamental capital. You can build finance capital on the back of social capital, but you don't build social capital on finance capital. Many of us say to the World Bank, they say we do the really serious work, we invest in infrastructure. But when they say infrastructure, they mean physical infrastructure, they mean ports, energy grids, roads, but actually it's cultural infrastructure that really, really holds our societies together. And it's a hugely, hugely important issue. And so if I look at London, my city, now the cultural life of the city and the economic life of the city are completely integrated. 80% of the visitors who come to London say they come because they like the cultural vitality of the city. They certainly don't come for the prices because it's become very expensive. But people still come, not just as tourists, but they come to work, they come to start businesses. Bankers like coming to London because it's got a very vibrant museum and cultural life. 20% of the workforce work in the cultural industries. It generates 70 billion US for our economy. So we have to make culture and economy work together completely as an integrated whole. So when we talk about culture and creativity as soft power, actually culture is power. It is soft power, but it's also power. It's key to the way the global economy is going. And interestingly, this week, The Economist magazine, I don't know if you know The Economist, it's a very prominent international economic affairs magazine. They've done some predictions for 2026. And one of them was about the music industry of Latin America. They said the region's cultural industries, once thought to be peripheral, have become central to global entertainment. And they particularly cited I'm Still Here as a statement of the fact that the Brazilian film industry is rising in importance as a film industry. And I know that in your definition of creative industries here at Firjan, cultural industries is a relatively small part of the whole story. But the cultural industries are worth $3 trillion worldwide. It's a huge industry. And here's another picture from The Economist. This is a couple of years ago. They ran a piece in which they argued that what the US was spending on entertainment, audiovisual entertainment, music, was the same as the amount they were investing in oil and gas. So entertainment is as important in our economies now globally as the oil and gas industry. But of course the important thing is they are not the oil and gas industry. They are something which is very, very different. And here's a nice quote from President Mitterrand. When in 1992 there was the global agreement on trade and tariffs was under negotiation, and the Americans traditionally were trying to beat up the European industry to say we should be open to complete control by America of our film and TV industries. And President Mitterrand said, no, this is not like trade for other commodities. These are not commodities, they're expressions of the human spirit. And of course, the issue of the creative industries is that it's not just about the economy, it is also about who we are as individuals, as human beings, and as a society. And of course, one of the other differences is oil and gas powered the industrial economy because the industrial economy was fundamentally about products. What powers the new economy is the creative imagination. It's about creativity. The difference is that the more oil we use, the less oil we have. The more oil we use, the more we mess up our planet. But the more creativity we use, the more creative we get. So creativity grows rather than shrinking. And it generates solutions for the huge problems that we now face. Climate change, urban intensification, the complexities of social media, how young people are suffering with anxiety and depression around the world. So it's a very, very different kind of economy. And I want to talk about one of the symbols of this new economy, which is about ideas. This guy, Johnny Ive, is a graphic designer. Now, when Steve Jobs decided to create the iPhone, who did he invite to lead the team that developed the iPhone was not an electronics engineer, but was a graphic designer. Because he said, this must be something which it's instinctive for people to use. They have to feel it. We have to start with the people, not with the technology. And Apple don't own the product, they own the idea. So Apple have no manufacturing capacity at all. But the iPhone, which is made mainly in China, now being made more and more in India, the people who make the iPhone take about 20% of the value. Apple keeps 60% of the value of every iPhone that's been made because it was their idea. And that idea is now worth $200 billion a year to them. So this is an economy where the idea is more important than the product. And, going backwards, I'm sorry. So this is one of the things that Steve Jobs said. This is him, Steve Jobs, presenting the world's first iPhone, whenever that was, 2008, 2009, I can't remember. And people said to him, why has Apple become such a successful company? And he said, because we're at the interface of liberal arts and technology. It's not just about technology, it's about the mixture of arts and technology. That is the crucial element in all this new development that's going on. And we have to, that's why governments have problems with it, it's why investors have problems with it, but that's the core. It's about a mixture of liberal art and technology. It's about people as much as it is about things. And creativity is all very well. We talk about creativity, we need creative solutions, but we know that creativity by itself is not a complete solution. This is one of my wonderful grandchildren did this, and she will do 20 pictures like this in an hour. She's more productive than Picasso, but we wouldn't call that great art. It's creativity unchained. It's creativity unharnessed. And when we talk about creativity, really what we're very often talking about is innovation. Innovation is creativity when it's thinking about people and thinking about social purpose. And it's important to bear that in mind. So, whoops, still going the wrong way. So here is a crazy-looking machine. But this guy in the crazy-looking machine is a man called Clive Sinclair. He was an inventor in the UK, very early developer of personal computers. And he was regarded in the UK and in most of Europe as a kind of genius. And he said, I'm going to reinvent personal urban transportation. Everyone thought this is wonderful. Share buyers piled into his company. The share value went through the roof. And eventually, when this wonderful machine was invented and appeared out on the street, we all went, oh, this is going to revolutionize public transport, personal transport. Of course it wasn't. It was a complete disaster. There are about 3 or 4 of them in the world, and they're all in museums. It did not fundamentally change personal transportation at all. Here's, whoop, I keep going the wrong way, I'm sorry. Here is a very uncreative-looking machine, the Honda 90, the most successful motor vehicle ever built anywhere in the world, 100 million sold so far. 90% of every pizza that's been eaten in the world was delivered on the back of a Honda 90. But the difference is that Honda started with a good idea, and then every year they talked with their customers and they made small improvements to make the machine better and better and better, make it more efficient, and its sales continued to burgeon because it was always at the leading edge. The difference between the two is that Clive Sinclair focused purely on the technology and Honda focused on the people. They focused on what was really, really important, the people. Innovation is about making sure that creativity responds to people's needs. And that reflects on the way we organize our businesses. It's about people. And I think we often forget that in the creative economy, it's not just about great ideas, it's about the way they're organized. And I want to talk about that for a minute, because if we're going to realize creativity as an asset, we have to think about what are the processes by which that asset is improved and built upon. And this is a chart from a piece of research that was done in the south of England, in Brighton, about 10 or 15 years ago, of 400 small creative businesses, mainly digital media businesses. One of the results of the research was that what they called superfused companies, and if you look at that chart, the third one down, superfused companies were companies where the creative people, the technology people, and the finance people all treated each other with equal dignity and esteem. They all understood each other, had an expertise they didn't have. And they were growing, as you can see, 3 times faster than unfused companies, the companies where either the business people were running it, or the techies were running it, or the creative people were running it. So the success was not even down so much to the product as to the way it was working, that it was about people. It was about people working together, sharing their ideas, and celebrating the diversity of their ideas and respecting the diversity of their ideas. So, thinking about how innovation spreads, how innovation really does change the economy, because after all, the reason why governments are interested in creativity is because they're really interested in innovation. Governments on the whole are a bit frightened of creativity. It's a very, very unpredictable beast, but innovation is something which is much more dynamic in terms of influencing the rest of the economy. And there's been a lot of research into how innovation works, what drives innovation. So that FUSE project, the project I was just showing you, was about how innovation can come from people working together and sharing together. The World Economic Forum did a big piece of research on innovation to try and find out if companies that invested in research and development, or companies that developed and drew in people with particular skills, were the ones that would benefit more than others. And what they found was that really it was as much about the workers as anything else. So they said it might be more appropriate to focus on creative workers regardless of the sector in which they work. Creative workers moving from firm to firm may be able to share knowledge about processes and help introduce them to new firms. So again, this business of innovation is about people. And if it's going to be about people, that means it comes down to the education system and creating a workforce where people learn to respect each other, treat each other with dignity, share their ideas in an open and collaborative way. So the logic of that is when we think about the creative economy and we think about how we realize creative assets, I like this observation from a cultural critic in the UK that what's really driving the creative economy is not so much what it does, but how it's organized. And we know that how it's organized is based very largely on informality. And one of the big problems that we all have with the creative economy is that so much of it is completely informal. It's individual people, it's micro businesses, many of which don't even reveal their identity to government, sometimes because they don't want to, sometimes because they're not sufficiently organized. But it does mean that companies are under the radar and we don't really know very much about what's going on and how they're working. So how they're organized on an informal basis, they're organized on a basis where people share, and most of all, they're organized on the basis of experimentation. So if we think about a company like I don't know if any of you have ever played Candy Crush. The guys who invented Candy Crush, typical of games developers, and in this sense, that they never regard failure as failure. They always call it work in progress. And the people who invented Candy Crush, developed Candy Crush, published 64 games, none of which were commercially successful, until they came up with Candy Crush, which has now earned them something like 20 billion US. The point about it is that in the old economy, we tended to think of failure as something which is the mark of disaster. We have to get the experts in beforehand, and we have to develop a product which is perfect before it reaches the market. The basis of the creative economy is it's an iterative process. You try, you keep trying, you keep trying, you reflect, you move on, you build. You never talk about failure. And that's, of course, one of the reasons why financing the creative industries is so very difficult, because you don't know whether what you're working on is going to be a success or not. And you know, I worked a lot in the film industry, and I know in the 1950s and 1960s in Hollywood, they used to call it the know-nothing business, because you can have the best A-list stars in the movie, you can have the best scriptwriters in the movie, you can have the best marketing in the movie, but you don't know whether it will be a success until it's in front of an audience. And sometimes the film with the biggest stars is a disaster. And as we now know from social media, a kid who comes up with half a dozen images and put them up on Instagram can have 1 million followers. These things are very unpredictable. And that's why it's so difficult for governments to think about how they engage with them, and so difficult for the finance community to understand how they can invest in them, because most creative people don't have much in the way of collateral. So one of the things which I was thinking about when Jean Trom was talking about Medellin, talking about how people work together, one of the things which I think is crucial to the way we think about realizing creativity as an asset is something which in Indonesia they call the multi-stakeholder approach. And that is, if you're going to make anything work in a big sense in terms of cultural policy or economic policy, you have to have 6 players. That's why they call it the hexahelix approach. And they're business, government, the community, academia, the media, and then the 6th player is what they call intermediaries. It's the people who can be the interpreters between the creative world and government. We need to have these interpreters because they're the people who enable creative people to speak to government, because the danger is that most creative people think the government is a pain, they think the government is a problem, they think the government's stupid, and the government say, these people will not talk serious business to us. It's a simple point. But in the UK, we were arguing for years about having film incentive breaks, tax breaks for film businesses. And our finance ministry kept saying, you're not presenting any evidence that convinces us at all. When eventually, as a collective in the film industry, we really got together and thought through how we presented the arguments in very serious economic terms, then we began to get traction with the finance ministry. And I think so often in growing this sector, we forget that it's not that government's a problem, it's not that creative people are badly organized and poor business people, it's that the two simply cannot communicate. They need to have interpreters. So this multi-stakeholder approach is one of the ways in which we learn how to kind of work with an industry which works on a very different basis from many traditional industries. And some of you may know of Cisco, big American tech company. They have one of the mantras for their staff is, it's better to ask forgiveness than seek permission. Sounds great. I once asked a Cisco manager, how many people have lost their jobs because they took you too literally? No answer. It's a brave thing to do. The point being, you've got to experiment, you've got to try, you've got to risk failure. That's the way this whole sector drives on. And innovation is something which comes out of thinking about people first and technology second. So 15 years ago, with a friend, we set up an organization called Creative England. And our slogan was, talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not. Because one of the things that is so obvious is that every community everywhere has got plenty of talented people in it, plenty of talented young people. The issue that they have is they cannot be connected with opportunity. Sometimes because they haven't got the interpreters that will introduce them to the markets and the networks that they need to succeed. And very often young people are completely unaware of their own talent and their own capacities. I worked for 10 years as a youth worker, and one of the things that struck me in poor inner city communities in London was how many talented young people did not realize that they were talented, did not realize that they could do something with their creative talent. And many of the things in our society militate against that. And it's not just the way our education system works and the way our employment system works. It's also parents don't want their kids to go into the creative sector because they then want them to be, why don't you be a lawyer or a doctor or an engineer? We don't want you to be a filmmaker or a musician or an artist. It's too dangerous. So one of the problems we have in growing the creative economy, growing the asset, is encouraging young people, connecting talent with opportunity. And that's a very, very serious issue around the world because with the introduction, the bombshell of AI, which I'm going to get onto in a minute, what's going to happen to the labor market? For many young people with entry-level skills or with no skills, the future is pretty bleak. And we have to think about that because this is an economy, because it's about people, because it's about ideas, because it's about people working together, is fundamentally a labor-intensive economy. It's not capital-intensive. It's about people. The chief executive of our main telecoms company in the UK used to say, all you need to start a business in the 21st century is a dog, a chair, and a phone. The dog wakes you up in the morning, you sit on the chair, and your phone, you pick up your phone, and you're in business. It's not capital-intensive. It's not like an industry where you need to build factories or have transport. It's about ideas. And the ideas can come from a kid on the street just as much as they come from an MBA from Harvard. And so in building a future economy where technology is going to be responsible more and more for much of the dull work, the manufacturing work, what are we going to do? What are our kids going to do? This is the one sector that is labor intensive. In the UK, we've been tracking employment in the creative industries for the last 25 years. And almost every year, with the exception of the year of the pandemic, our jobs in the creative sector have grown at least twice the rate of the rest of the economy. This is a labor-intensive sector. And if you think about the impact of AI, think about what happens if we have driverless vehicles. The default job for any kid in the UK who can't get a job is they drive a van or they run a delivery moped. What happens if these jobs are replaced by driverless cars, by drone delivery? These are really serious issues. And here in Brazil, where your youth unemployment rate, 18% now, was 28% a few years ago, so it's coming down. But the consequences, and all around the world, there are hundreds of millions of young people who are looking for jobs, who have aspirations and ambitions. And the old economy is not going to deliver for them. This is the one area where creativity is essential for our future. It's the one area where somebody with innate intelligence and creativity stands as good an opportunity as somebody who has high technical skills, providing that we create the right opportunities for them. So one of the ways that we do that, one of the ways we build this asset is with intellectual property. And the other thing that I was asked to talk about in this talk was IP. And I think most of us tend to think of IP as a sort of ideas policeman that means that a creator keeps the value of what they produce and nobody else steals it. But the real purpose of IP is to create, to systematize the business of inventions. Because if you patent an idea, you have to set out very fully what that idea is. That means that nobody can copy it, that people can build on it. And the purpose of IP, the real purpose of IP, is to grow knowledge, not to restrict it to a few people who are creators. And I'll give you a classic example. In the 1950s, the US car industry had developed the technology of seatbelts. They worked out the engineering needed for seatbelts, and they knew that seatbelts would reduce accidents. But they deliberately suppressed that information because they thought it would make their customers think about accidents and danger rather than thinking about speed and comfort. So nothing was done about it. And it was only when the Swedish company Volvo decided to work with an aviation safety engineer, and they came up with a 3-point seatbelt that now every car in the world has. And they published, as their IP, they published the technology, the engineering, the physics that lay behind that particular design for the seatbelt. But they did it on an open source Creative Commons license, so they made it available to all car makers. And it shamed the whole of the rest of the car industry into adopting the same technology. And it also set new standards, because good intellectual property regulation helps to set new standards. So it's not just about protecting, it's also about innovating. So again, I got this quote from the World Economic Forum, who did some research on IP. And one of their points is that we don't think about intellectual property as a way of growing the creative sector, but it is. And they said, IP laws need to protect multi-generational and collective knowledge. We should seek to reward not just the creator as an individual, but also everyone involved in the creative process, from the individual to the community. And the onus should be on innovation, not protection. And so I'm reading that out for the interpreters rather than leaving it to you to read off the screen. And if you think about something like the wine industry, of course the wine industry is not the product of one man, one woman. It's the product of hundreds of years of experiment by small communities. But the wine industry protects its intellectual property rigorously. They build on it. We were hearing in the first session this morning when Neto and Julia were talking about how every municipality in the Rio de Janeiro region wants to have something distinctive. They want to have something that they can identify themselves with. Intellectual property is a way of ensuring that we have ideas which we can claim as distinctive of our own, but they also help other people to build on those ideas and to generate new ideas. So intellectual property is about multi-generational sharing of knowledge, and that's very often something which, at this time when so many indigenous communities and traditional work practices and traditional work products are under threat, it suddenly becomes much more important. This is a way of protecting so much intangible heritage. Not just protecting it, but using it as a way of building on innovation. And that's why I like the World Economic Forum, not the most progressive agency in the world, the fact that they say the bonus should be on innovation, not protection. We have to be thinking about the future. Now I want to get on to talking about AI, because intellectual property conceived in that way is a social good. It's something which comes out of collective action, collective community. It's something that grows out of the cultural heritage that we all share collectively. It's, if you like, the capital for so much creativity going forward. But AI is not a social phenomenon. OpenAI calls itself OpenAI, but it is not open. AI is under the control of a very small number of very wealthy people. And when you read something like this from Larry Page, who was the founder and still is the chief executive of Google, saying, maybe you don't want to ask a question. Maybe you just want to have it answered before you ask it. That would be better. No, it would not be better. I do not want AI to be my boss. I want AI to be my helper. I want AI to be my assistant. And there's a real danger, it seems to me, that although AI is, of course, a massive asset, it's going to change the way we can handle huge masses of data, which we're all dealing with now all the time. AI can help us with the answers. But we don't want AI to be making decisions that only we as human beings should be making. And this is becoming a really serious and significant issue. There's an Argentinian writer who's written some very interesting pieces on what he calls the neo-colonialism of AI, which is that he says the AI world is in danger of producing three great empires: China, the US, and the European Union. I would like to think the European Union would be a great empire. It's a small empire, but it's still there. But the point is, it leaves many parts of the world, and particularly in the global south, at mercy. And after all, AI works in language. Large language models are based on language, and the default language of AI is English, with all that comes with it, with the attitudes and the values of the English-speaking world. So if AI is going to be an asset in building the intellectual property that we need for the future on a real collective shared basis, when so many of the great challenges that we face are much more, if you like, immediate in the global south than they are in the global north, particularly climate change, resource depletion, urban intensification. These things, we need the resources of AI, but we need to make sure that they are serving our needs as human beings, and we're not serving the needs of AI. So I do not want Larry Page to answer my questions before I've asked them. I want to be able to ask the question I want to ask, and I will benefit from the answers that AI is able to give me. So here's a great quote, I think, from a woman who is one of the world's leading cognitive sciences. She's one of the world's leading experts on AI, Margaret Bowden. And she said this, and again I'll read it: "A fundamental difference between AI systems and human beings is that computers don't care. Human intelligence enables us to achieve our goals and satisfy our needs, but computers have no needs, and therefore no real goals. Decisions about things that matter require human judgment." So I want to be able to make sure that AI is the tool, that I get to ask the questions, and AI helps me get the answers, not the other way around. And in this economy, which is entirely about human beings, it's about people. So it's about the fact that we have social empathy, that we care for each other, that we have love and passion, all the things that computers can't have and don't have. We have to make sure that those are the things that we build on. They are the real capital assets we have for the future. And I just finish up with this remarkable quote from Pope Leo. Last week was the 130th anniversary of the birth of cinema, in the sense that it was the first film show that took place in Paris by the Lumiere brothers. And the Pope wrote a letter to the film industry last week. I'm not a Catholic, but it's the best analysis of the power of cinema that I have ever read. And one of the things that he said in it was, the logic of algorithms tend to repeat what works, but art opens up new possibilities. I think this is a beautiful quote. Algorithms are based on what's working. Algorithms are about what's rational. And it may be rational for a company to get rid of all its workers and have robots doing it. It may be rational for a company to get people on a completely gig economy, no contracts basis. It may be rational for a company to say, you don't have any holiday pay because it's going to reduce the cost. But that is not something which creates new possibilities. So in thinking about the future of the creative economy, when there is so much anxiety about AI, it does seem to me we need to hang on to the fact that if we're building creativity as an asset, if we're building intellectual property as the capital upon which we build more creativity, then remembering that art is what opens up possibilities. It's what we do as individual human beings and as members of communities. And as we've been hearing so much today, we're all shaped by the power of the communities that we come from, the heritage that we share, the language that we speak, the customs that we value. These are the things that give us the clues to how we answer the great challenges of the future. And I'm under no illusions. I welcome AI because it's going to be a fantastic asset. But it has to be an asset that we use as a tool, not an asset that we allow to become our master. So I'm sorry to finish the day on this rather boring analysis of creativity and intellectual property, but that's what I was asked to do, and I've tried to do it. So thank you very much for listening.
Muito obrigada. A gente tem tempo para perguntas. Se alguém quiser fazer pergunta, é só levantar a mão e o microfone vai até. Alguém?
Aqui.
Opa. Você faz em português?
Posso em português?
Olá, boa tarde, eu sou Maria Eduarda. E obrigada pela sua palestra, foi incrível. Acho que você tocou em muitos pontos diferentes, em diferentes abordagens, mas eu também vejo que tem um caminho que leva a pensar a criatividade para um lugar da produtividade. E a gente que trabalha com a criatividade também precisa descansar para ser criativo. E como uma jovem, não tão jovem, mas assim, uma jovem que está iniciando a carreira agora, eu penso que alguns jovens ainda não sabem como se entender enquanto seres criativos. O que é a criatividade, como desenvolver a criatividade. Então, queria que você falasse um pouco sobre esse desenvolvimento da criatividade, pensando que é um caminho da produtividade, a gente pode criar muitos negócios, mas também tem uma sensibilidade humana nesse trabalho.
Thank you. That's a really good question. And I think I have arguments with the UK government about this because they are constantly saying we must make our creative industries more productive. I say this is not about productivity. My granddaughter is very productive when she's creating paintings in the morning, but that doesn't do any benefit to anybody except the paper industry because she's using so much paper. But productivity is about output per hour. And there's an Australian economist who I think has come up with a beautiful explanation of the difference between productivity and what creative people need, and that is this. He said, anything that we can measure by output per hour, it's probably better for a robot to do. And I'm very happy for a robot to do it. What human beings are good at doing is experimenting, playing, and wasting time. And he said it's playing, experimenting, and wasting time that has been responsible for most of the great discoveries in world history. They're the things that drive art and science, but that's why governments and bankers are not very interested in it. And I think that's a really interesting answer. It sounds like a kind of cheap joke, but actually, the creative sector is not about productivity. It's about originality, and it's about the creative imagination. We don't know where it's going to take us. It's originality and authenticity, not productivity. And the old joke, however wonderfully productive the string players are, you can't get 3 musicians to play a Bach string quartet. You have to have 4. Productivity doesn't apply in music. It's nothing to do with music. It's originality and authenticity that matters in music. And I think for young people, obviously I cannot speak at all for young people in this part of the world, but in so much of UK and Europe, there's a kind of anxiety that young people feel they have to get a job, they have to sort their career out very early on. And we need to be able to create the space for failure, create the space for experiment. And that comes out of shared cultural and social values. And I think at the moment, we're putting so much pressure on young people to focus on make one decision and decide what they're going to do and demonstrate how good they are in one particular field. Again, the basis of this whole sector is not about having one skill, it's about being able to share skills, it's about being able to kind of work together. And the biggest investor in media in the UK, a man who was responsible mainly for financing Avatar, so he made a lot of money, and he used to say, why do these art colleges try and teach art students how to run their businesses? He said it'd be much better to teach them social skills so that they can make friends with bankers and accountants and they'll do their work for them. And again, a flippant answer, but we need to think about how we share the skills that we need socially rather than thinking we have to have a particular skill that will make us very competitive in the labor market. I just think that's driving an economy and a social system which is creating more and more anxiety. And in the end of the day, it's not productivity that really counts. It's authenticity and originality. So I hope that answers your question.
O microfone vai rodar? Aqui.
John, obrigada pela palestra. Eu tenho uma pergunta, porque esse assunto da propriedade intelectual é um assunto que eu acho que tem muito preconceito, né? Preconceito, principalmente na área da cultura aqui no Brasil. E você hoje desconstruiu um pouco, né, essa visão de que deve ser protegido para alguns, quando você fala que isso deve ser de um grupo, por exemplo, como você citou, as manifestações populares brasileiras, elas não são de uma pessoa, elas são de um grupo, né, de uma comunidade. E aí eu queria que você, se você lembrasse assim, de algum exemplo de algum produto da economia criativa que tem a propriedade intelectual compartilhada, assim, sabe? Como fazer isso com essa estrutura que a gente tem hoje, burocrática, de reconhecimento da propriedade intelectual?
Yeah, okay, that's also a very good question. And I think I'd say this, that good IP, or very often there are certainly plenty of technology businesses that have discovered breakthroughs of one kind or another, and they've claimed the IP, but they've published it on an open source basis. So they make it available to other people to build on. I mean, I use Volvo as a very kind of classic example, but there are many examples in the creative sector as well. And actually, this may be a little bit contentious, but the strength of Silicon Valley in the US is built entirely on public IP, because nearly all the basic physics and intellectual thinking underpinning the way our screens work and the way our computing systems work and the way most of our digital systems work came out of publicly funded research and development. A lot of it done by the Pentagon, but it was publicly funded in the US, and the IP was owned, but it was all done on an open source basis to encourage industry to build on it and grow. And I think so much now, I am interested that in the creative sector, there are companies that do publish open source IP, because they see that if other companies build on what they are already developing, it can create new business opportunities for them. And in the same way that, you know, Volvo, instead of hanging on to the seatbelt idea, by giving it away, they benefited their own company, because people said, these guys are human beings. They're great. Their company is obsessed with safety, and they did their own brand image good, and they did their company a lot of good as well. So there are examples in the creative sector where people have shared their IP. I think it's a very contentious issue in the creative sector, because so many people feel that their IP has been stolen. And of course that's true, because we don't know how to protect it, and it's very complicated. One of the things which I think is beginning to happen in many economies is that governments are realizing that they have to have a much simpler IP system to encourage early stage creators and innovators to protect their property. And it doesn't mean that they keep it secret from anybody else, because the point is, if you publish a patent, you have to publish the patent. Anybody can read it. Even Google's ideas, you can go and read them in the Library of Congress, because their intellectual property submissions have to be recorded. So they're there. And I think we make it a very complicated process. Lawyers make a lot of money out of it. It's very, very unpopular in a lot of the creative world. But I think we have to see it. That's what I like about this World Economic Forum report. They're saying we think about IP in a very particular mindset, but actually, if we rethink it, if we simplify it, if we open it up, we can see that it can become a shared asset. It's like a kind of library that other people can use. So you can't copy, but you can build on. You can't imitate, but you can learn from. I think those are very, very important principles. And that's why I wanted to talk about it. I think it's a very fundamental mind shift. People don't think about intellectual property in that way, and I don't think most governments do, but we have to try and get to that stage, because otherwise creators cannot own the value, the commercial value of their property. And it's important that they should be able to, but important also that it should be a subject from which other people can learn.
Acho que foi. Muito obrigada, John.
Okay.
Muito obrigada a todo mundo.
Gente, olha só, a gente vai ter um encerramento super rápido, porque eu sei que a gente já está cansado, né? A gente escutou em outras línguas, foi um desafio para a gente escutar o John aqui como última palestra. Eles também, diversos, se desafiaram aqui para falar em português. Então, a gente vai fazer um encerramento super rápido. E eu vou chamar aqui, então, para o palco, para esse encerramento, duas pessoas que vão mudar de papel, né, que são as nossas Anas, MCs, Ana Cláudia e Ana Lúcia, por favor. Luísa, desculpa. Podem vir, sentem-se, podem sentar. Vou chamar também o Neto, que é o pai aqui do evento, todo mundo conhece. Tá ruim? Não. E vou chamar a Natane também, que produziu muito conteúdo do que a gente viu aqui. E vai ser uma conversa rápida, principalmente de agradecimento. A gente está assim, no fim desse segundo dia, cansados. Vocês estão também? Não, estão ótimos. Vai ter biscoito Globo e mate lá fora daqui a pouco. Mas a gente está muito feliz, porque, como a gente falou, né, no início desse evento, é uma oportunidade da gente entender um outro vetor de desenvolvimento para a nossa cidade, para o nosso estado, para o nosso país. Então, eu queria ouvir, por favor, da Ana, um destaque do primeiro dia, um destaque do segundo dia para você.
Acho que o destaque do primeiro dia, difícil, né, porque teve tanta coisa importante, mas eu acho que o mapa foi muito bacana, assim, o mapa do soft power, porque...
Segundo dia.
Não...
Foi hoje de manhã, porque já foi tanta
só.
coisa.
Então, do segundo dia, eu vou falar do mapa. Vou começar, então, de trás para frente. E eu achei que o destaque mesmo do dia foi a plateia aqui. Porque todo mundo que estava aqui, assim, um dia super denso, super cansativo mesmo, mas a gente teve momentos assim de muita concentração, né? Todo mundo ficou aqui, perguntas interessantes, assim. Então, acho que isso mostra a importância do tema, né? Como isso, assim, como a gente tem, como a gente precisa falar disso e como a Casa Firjan é um lugar para se falar disso, né? Então, o destaque do segundo dia. Depois eu falo do primeiro ou falo logo?
Pode falar.
Do primeiro? Eu adorei ver as iniciativas, as discussões do Rio de Janeiro. Gostei muito de ver como a indústria criativa, né, está colocada com os exemplos práticos. E eu acho que isso tangibilizou, né, tudo que ia se falar depois, né, no dia de hoje, né. Então, eu achei que os exemplos práticos foram muito interessantes e, claro, e assim, é bom quando a gente enxerga nos exemplos, né, da publicidade, dos negócios, né, o que vocês estão estudando, né, e achei incrível o primeiro dia ser realizado, porque esse encontro aqui, gente, deu trabalho pra caramba. Então, o destaque do primeiro dia foi ter o encontro, né? Muito bom.
Legal. Obrigada, Ana. Ana?
Olha, o destaque que eu vou falar, eu achei fantástica a curadoria, né, todos os palcos, os painéis nacionais e internacionais, a troca com a plateia realmente foi fantástica, mas o que eu acho que chamou bastante atenção nos 2 dias foi perceber que assim, a indústria criativa ela é feita por talentos, por sensibilidade, por pessoas e por movimentos engajados individuais e coletivos, né? Mas que a gente precisa, para ter mais eficiência, comunicar melhor, demonstrar melhor, e, com isso, conseguir influenciar. E, em vários dos painéis que a gente teve, a gente viu a questão de quanto ter dados, ter métricas e saber fazer análises muda o tipo de diálogo que a gente consegue ter, tanto com o mercado, quanto com executivos, patrocinadores e todos os interlocutores. Então, sem dúvida, né, no segundo dia, a gente teve o ápice tanto da demonstração do trabalho que vocês vêm fazendo há 1 ano, do mapa Rio Soft Power, e também do índice global, né? A gente conseguir entender como que essa métrica global é realizada com tanta profundidade e como que isso pode ajudar a gente de forma prática a entender o que tem que fazer nos próximos passos. Obrigada.
Legal, Ana. É isso, a gente passou, né, de escutar com paciência no mundo tão rápido e digital e TikTok, a gente escutou uma palestra de 1 hora de uma pessoa coreana com tradução consecutiva, né? E realmente a gente ficou aqui concentrado. Então, queria dar parabéns para essa plateia. Que a gente que é professor sabe que isso é muito raro de acontecer, sem ficar no celular. E eu queria também, então, chamar a Natane. A Natane, ela faz parte da nossa equipe, ela é jornalista, e ela nos ajuda a produzir todo esse conteúdo. Eu acho que todo o conteúdo que vocês viram aqui passou pela Natane em algum momento. E aí eu queria que você contasse para eles o que já existe de conteúdo que também se pode acessar, que eles podem compartilhar por aí.
Vamos lá. Oi, gente, boa tarde. Bom, então, eu vou repetir 2 coisas que a Ana já falou ao longo desses últimos dias, mas, como disse o nosso amigo que falou de Medellín, a repetição é importante. Gente, as videoaulas estão aí para todo mundo poder acessar. São 12 videoaulas que estão no ar. Está lá no site da Casa Firjan, então, aí, especialistas aqui da indústria criativa do Rio de Janeiro gravando, falando sobre a importância, entre outros temas. E temos também as gravações. Tem um monte de gente perguntando quando é que vão sair as gravações do Encontro, porque teve alguns painéis que eu não consegui assistir. Dentro de 2 semanas, tudo isso vai estar dentro da plataforma de conteúdo da Casa Firjan também, então é só acessar lá. Gente, toda a cobertura também do evento aqui, o Instagram da Casa Firjan está fazendo uma cobertura belíssima, então, pegando boas aspas dos nossos convidados, fazendo posts assim que consolidam um pouco das discussões diárias aqui, e tem também matérias jornalísticas que estão na nossa plataforma. E só para encerrar rapidinho, hoje de manhã a gente apresentou um mapa, ele está disponível no observatório da Firjan, que é observatório.firjan.com.br. Então, vocês receberam aí no kit, mas se quiserem acessar online, está disponível. E tem também o mapa digital, a versão digital, que é toda interativa, que tem ilustração. Isso também, a partir de amanhã, vai estar no site Rio Soft Power, que é esse site do QR Code de vocês. Então, assim, tem muito conteúdo para ser consumido. Eu acho que, assim, é isso. A gente ainda está absorvendo tudo que vimos aqui, mas o conteúdo está lá, então fiquem muito à vontade para usar e abusar aí desse monte de matéria e informação que tem para a gente. Obrigada, Júlia.
Obrigada, Natane. E agora queria assim perguntar para o pai do evento, né? Porque a gente escutou muito elogio à curadoria. Essa curadoria foi um trabalho de um grupo. Você vai falar do grupo?
Posso falar?
Tá, então ele vai falar do grupo, mas também do Neto. Neto também trabalha aqui com a equipe, e ele é o responsável, acho que ele falou com todos os palestrantes, né, de todas as línguas antes, e grande parte da curadoria é mérito dele. Por favor, fala aí o que vai acontecer para o ano que vem.
Bom, para 2026, nós temos 4 edições do Diálogos Criativos, né? Eu acho que é o embrião dessa discussão que nós temos aqui. Começou em 2023, quando a gente colocou no ar um evento com essa proposta de falar da força da indústria criativa como esse vetor de desenvolvimento e como o soft power pode ser um aliado. Esse ano só tivemos 2 edições, então ano que vem teremos 4 edições do Diálogos Criativos e, entendendo a necessidade de levar essa discussão para os interiores, nós vamos ter 4 edições dos Diálogos Criativos regionais. Vamos ao interior levar essa discussão, levar dados do município, trabalhar o soft power dos municípios, entendendo essa responsabilidade quase que missionária de falar de tudo isso que a gente discute aqui na capital. Sim, gente, eu acho que é muito importante trazer essa informação, é que a gente está quase 1 ano trabalhando nesse evento. Nós criamos um comitê, vocês veem o nome das pessoas que estão no comitê no folder atrás. Então, aqui, eu só não lembro todo mundo de memória, porque eu não estou... A Júlia pode ler depois os nomes. Mas agradecer a disponibilidade, a atenção, a dedicação. Eu entendo que o Encontro Internacional da Indústria Criativa ele é construído pelos profissionais criativos aqui da Firjan, que dão nome e acreditam. Então, meu agradecimento aí. Quem são, Júlia, essas pessoas?
Vou falar. E é legal porque muita gente fala que a gente tem que fazer as coisas de forma colaborativa, coletiva, é isso mesmo, né? Não são só pessoas aqui da nossa área, mas são de várias áreas. Bruna Rangel, Camila Pinho, Fernanda Lima, Gaia, Giovanni, está aqui, Joana, está ali, Júlia, Júlia Venegas, que está aqui também, Liliana, que deve estar aqui, a nossa produtora Mor, Natane, Neto, Paulo Vitor, que está ali também, Wallace, do Lab de Tendências, e Yasmin, que está aqui também. Gente, e aí, com esses agradecimentos, eu puxo assim, né, aquele momento, foi difícil fazer, mas foi muito gratificante. A gente queria agradecer aos tradutores de Libras e aos tradutores aqui, aos intérpretes também. Pessoal lá do som, aqui eu acho que é o Júlio que está aqui. Aí. Tínhamos o Rodrigo, o Ivan também aqui, e o Rodrigo lá, eu acho, né? Porque eles prestam atenção na palestra toda, porque a pessoa fica aqui, põe aquele QR Code, agora passa aquele vídeo. Então, eles prestam atenção em tudo que a gente está falando aqui. Queria agradecer, então, além desse comitê, o pessoal do GT, de Economia Criativa, que está por aqui, que amanhã ainda tem mais trabalho, tá? Que a gente vai juntar o pessoal do GT com todos os palestrantes aqui para a gente dar os próximos passos, né, o trabalho colaborativo. Então, queria agradecer também. E agradecer algumas pessoas que trabalharam aqui nesse evento, que foi o Paulo, com o conteúdo, né, todo do mapa, também junto com a gente. O Vitor, cadê o Vitor? Nosso jornalista, acho que o Vitor já foi, porque ele tinha que escrever matéria, né? Diogo também. Daniel, que está aqui com o Vitor hoje, mas Vitor acompanhou a gente aí no mapa. Júlia Venegas, que foi a designer, vários elogios hoje ao mapeamento, Júlia está ali, designer do mapeamento. E nossas duas produtoras, uma está aqui e a outra, eu acho que como produtora, está lá fora resolvendo tudo, dando bolsa, né, para quem está querendo ainda e tal. Tá linda, né? Pois é. É um trabalho do Grupo Soma com a muda de tecido reciclado, com artesãs, enfim, é lindo, cheio de significado. E obrigada à nossa superprodutora, Yasmin, e a Lili, que está lá fora, a Liliane. Equipes de comunicação, super. Pedro, maravilhoso, que faz o trabalho aqui também de entreter a criança. Todas as pessoas de comunicação nossas da sede. Queria agradecer também minha chefe, que não está aqui agora, mas falou com a gente na abertura ontem, assistiu vários dias aqui desse encontro. E é isso, é uma defensora dessa pauta aqui dentro dessa instituição. Eu acho que a gente acredita nela, é muito óbvio que ela pode ser um fator de diferencial, né, para o nosso desenvolvimento. Eles estão fazendo isso lá fora, a gente tem que aprender como é que a gente faz isso cada vez melhor aqui dentro. Então, é isso. Acabou? Tem mais alguma coisa? Gente, muito obrigada e vamos lá para o nosso coquetel agora.